Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. Yesterday was a pretty rare moment within the XRP community because two of the most senior engineering leaders at Ripple, that would be, of course, David Schwartz, he's Ripple's CTO and co-creator of XRP and the XRP Ledger, and also Jay Akinyele, who is the head of engineering over at Ripple. They both began, out of nowhere, publicly discussing the idea of native staking on the XRP Ledger. Now, this is not a proposal. It's not a roadmap. It's not something that's being implemented today. It is a serious discussion, though, and something that absolutely could happen in the future. And so for now, you could call it just a thought experiment if you want, but it's being taken seriously, no question, to a high degree. I'll show you in just a second here, but it's an extremely important conversation. And it's one that forces everyone to examine what makes the XRP Ledger unique, what absolutely, frankly, must not change, even if this is implemented one day, and what might be possible as the ecosystem continues to evolve, because there's a lot that's been unfolding here lately. But before going further, I do want to be clear, I do not have a financial background of any kind. I am not offering financial advice, and you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto-related topics, but just as a hobby and just for fun. All right, and so not surprisingly, basically every single crypto media outlet in existence has already written an article about this. But I don't think a lot of these really get sufficiently to the heart of what's going on and why this matters, what considerations really need to be thoughtfully discussed. So I want to go through that, but there are a couple examples on your screen right now. This is broadly discussed. And again, for good reason. And here, Brad Garlinghouse, he was making sure that everybody under the sun saw this. So there's a post from the head of engineering, that's Jay Akinyele, and he reposted a thread from the head of engineering. This is Brad Garlinghouse here. This is just yesterday, and his post alone was seen 392,000 times. And he simply wrote, with new DeFi protocols and apps emerging for XRP, what other possibilities for the network should be discussed? Ripple engineering lead Jay Akinyele tackles this and the questions that need to be considered at the outset. And then you go to Jay's post. This one was seen 679,000 times. David Schwartz reposted that. His post, right there, was seen 431,000 times. So, and that's just from the three of them. So I think it's safe to say that this has been seen by, it seems like just literally millions of times. Millions and millions and millions of people have seen this, so of course you better believe I'm going to opine on this, and I've got some thoughts on this. But before talking about what staking might mean for XRP, everyone needs to have a basic understanding of how staking actually works on other blockchains, or else the part that pertains to XRP specifically isn't going to mean any freaking sense. It's just going to sound like I'm talking a foreign language here. But on proof of stake networks, which is where you'd expect to see staking, networks like Ethereum, Solana, and Cardano, staking is simply a security mechanism. So when people stake their tokens, they aren't doing any technical work themselves, okay? All they're doing is locking their tokens up so that they can't be moved or sold. And then delegating them to a validator who does run the actual node software, which helps run the network. So those locked tokens, basically they act as an economic collateral which backs the validator. That's the purpose of doing it. So the more tokens a validator has delegated to them, the more stake weight they have, right? And that just means, the more often the network chooses them to validate blocks. That's all that means. The more of a coin you have delegated specifically to you, if you are a validator, the more weight that you have. And so it just makes it more likely again that the network would choose you to validate blocks. And so there's economic incentive, obviously, and so because such validators, because they're chosen more often, they earn more rewards, and so that is why that matters. And the people who delegated to them, they share those rewards. That's why even if you're a person who's just staking, you're not running the technical software to make validation on the network happen. You do get to share in the rewards. And the rewards themselves come from new tokens being minted as well as from transaction fees typically. So if you stake Ethereum token, just for example, you get more free Ethereum tokens periodically. The entire point of this system is to keep validators honest. Because think about it, if a validator misbehaves, For example, say they're just doing something to try and cheat the network effectively. The protocol slashes their stake. That means that both the validator and the people who delegated to them lose some of their locked tokens. So it doesn't matter that the delegators did nothing wrong, because they're not the ones that are doing any of the technical work. They're not doing the validating. But again, the way it's set up, it doesn't matter. It does not matter if the delegators did nothing wrong. The network treats delegation as a trust decision. And so if you trust a dishonest validator, you do share in the consequences. That's just the way it works. Now, that might sound like tough love, but honestly, in practice, this is exactly why validators almost never act maliciously. Think about it. They'd be caught super quickly. Yes, they would. It's hard to earn trust, but easy to lose it. Think about that. I mean, they lose real money instantly. Their delegators would absolutely abandon them in droves. And then they lose all their influence on the network because nobody would stake with them anymore. That's the point of this, and that's why it doesn't happen. So the entire proof of stake model relies on this economic pressure. So staking exists because the threat of financial loss is what keeps the network secure. That's the reason it makes sense to have non-technical people. I'd conclude myself in that bucket. That's why it makes sense to have non-technical people like myself staking, because we get to choose if we're going to support validators, or which ones we're going to support if we're participating in that, right? That's the purpose of it. But think about it though. This is also why staking doesn't really translate to the XRP ledger. It really doesn't. That's why when I saw this discussed, I was like, what the hell does this even mean? I was super curious instantly, because I was like, we have a completely different consensus model here with the XRP ledger. The XRP ledger does not use stake weight, okay? It does not rely on locked collateral. It's also, of course, not proof of work. It's an entirely different consensus mechanism. It also does not punish validators economically. There's no financial incentive, to operate as a validator, running a node or as a just any sort of operational, anything that, from a technical perspective, anything that you could do technically to help run the XRP ledger, there is no monetary incentive, and that's absolutely by design. Its entire design philosophy, it avoids these systems, which is why, any discussion of XRP staking, gotta approach it with extreme care, let's say. I think it's safe to say that, because you can't simply graft a proof of stake model onto a network that was never meant to depend on economic incentives for security. You can't just do that. It's not a one size fits all. And the fees paid on the XRP ledger, they're not even revenue, mind you. They're all burned entirely. The fees that are charged to transact on the XRP ledger literally go to no one. They simply cease to exist. So, this means that, frankly, the network was intentionally designed to avoid financial gains, honestly. That's really at the heart of it. I think that's a fair way to characterize it. And it also means that consensus on the XRP ledger depends on trust lists, not on the size of anyone's XRP holdings. So, the network advances based on, it's a deterministic voting model, UNL, unique node list, which is why transactions are so fast and cheap. You've taken all the friction out of this thing. And so that brings us right to the heart of the discussion. If the XRP ledger does not use stake weight, and staking is normally tied to security and block production, then why would a co-creator of XRP, David Schwartz, and also Ripple's head engineer even entertain this conversation? Well, the answer is that the XRP ecosystem, it's a changing. XRP spot ETFs now exist, by the way. You may have heard about that. Going very well so far, by the way. And more are going to launch. Just very soon. That's not the thrust of this video, but it's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of what's happening in the XRP ecosystem right now. And, institutional products like tokenized treasuries and money market funds, they have launched, actually, and undoubtedly more will launch. That's real world utility right there. And then DeFi, DeFi activity on the XRP ledger, clearly growing through automated market makers. And then, of course, there's also, and I think there's a really good chance this comes one day, It's not live now, of course, but smart contract functionality, it is being pursued. I will not be surprised to see smart contract functionality on layer 1 on the XRP Ledger. And even David Schwartz, it was like a year or two ago, even he ended up coming around to the idea, thinking that actually there probably is a way to do this that's not going to sacrifice what the XRP Ledger is really great at. More on that in a second. I'll circle back to it. And so I found that very interesting. So it actually could happen, but David Schwartz was against having smart contract functionality on layer 1 of the XRP Ledger, like for, I mean, basically since inception. Literally from inception up until like whenever it was a year or two ago. So that was also an interesting topic of a conversation. But, you know, as XRP becomes more widely held by institutions, which is why I brought this up in the first space about the, you know, ETF, so on and so forth, you know, and as more functionality comes on chain, it's natural to explore whether, you know, there should someday be a way for XRP holders to earn yield without breaking the core principles of the network. And to be clear, when I say yield, I am talking about XRP holders getting more XRP for free as a reward for staking on the blockchain. So, you know, and this is where the conversation, frankly, becomes really interesting. So hang with me for the rest of this video if you've got time. Because I've been building up to this point. I just want to make sure I could say all that so that the rest of what I say in the video makes sense. But if a new model were ever designed, it would not look anything like Ethereum staking. To me, that's critically, like, well, it's of critical importance, but also very obvious, including on the way that if you just, I don't want to go through all of the posts that they shared. Some of it I had on flash on the screen here a bit. Some of it gets pretty technical though. But look, there would be, in this case, there would be like no block producer lottery, which is the case for other chains. There'd be no stake weighted voting, no slashing, no control based incentives. So for sure, very different than when you say staking, very different than what you've seen on pretty much any other chain that's implemented it. So instead, Ripple's engineers are asking a more subtle question. Is there a way to create yield for XRP holders without violating the XRP Ledger's design and without introducing centralizing forces that break the network? And, you know, for example, one possibility could be using a portion, of course, well, transaction-related activity, sure, but also smart contract execution fees in a future expanded system. So, because again, like I said a minute ago, the idea of us having layer 1 smart contract functionality ain't crazy. It's been discussed. It absolutely could happen. I mean, the sidechain, if you want to call it that even, I mean, it's its own blockchain, but Zahao, I don't want to go off on too much of a side rant here, but Zahao, like, it's implemented there. So you got to do it thoughtfully, but you absolutely can. I mean, Zahao, they used basically the same hooks technology that was created years and years and years ago for the XRP Ledger, and then they modify it to whatever degree, but then slapped it down on that Zahao blockchain, and it's working just fine. So it's more than just a proof of concept, but it actually is live. So that is a way. That is one way that there could be fees, and of course another possibility involves zero knowledge proofs, where, you know, contract execution could happen off chain, and then basically the XRP Ledger's job would simply be, you know, verifying these proofs. None of this is defined, and none of it's literally planned out, like I said at the outset of this video, but you know, these are the kinds of conceptual models that David Schwartz has hinted at as technically interesting. You know, rewarding XRP holders who stake their XRP with transaction fees wouldn't be enough, though. And why? Well, because those fees are so damn minimal, and you wouldn't want to increase those fees to reward stakeholders further, because then you're adding friction to the entire XRP ecosystem by making transactions cost more, which defeats the purpose of the XRP Ledger entirely. The XRP Ledger, fantastic for payments. That was the whole point from the beginning. Make a better version of Bitcoin that, just broadly speaking, is great for payments. That means, you know, low cost for transactions and blazing fast. And if you start increasing fees, you're adding friction. So it's tricky. You know, if something like this were ever implemented, it could be very good for XRP holders. I acknowledge that, if there's a smart way to do it, and there might be, because it would effectively turn XRP into a yield-bearing asset. It's just a question of where the yield will come from beyond transaction fees, because I insist those will not be enough, and I personally would not be cool with increasing fees just to pay staker, anybody that would stake. But I will say this, in institutions, they love them some predictable yield. Yes, they do. And that alone could significantly boost demand. Because yield, it's historically been one of the strongest drivers of asset accumulation. Honestly, it really has. And so for XRP specifically, native yield could support ETF demand. It definitely could. It could create more stickiness, if you will, for institutional holders. It could increase the amount of XRP that's voluntarily locked or delegated, for some kind of protocol participation. It would have that effect. I don't doubt it, but you have to do it smart. So all of this tends to support price. That's why it matters if you're an XRP holder, because it reduces available supply and increases the amount of XRP that holders want to keep rather than trade. That will absolutely materially impact the supply and demand dynamics for XRP. 100%, my friends. That is why this matters. That's why this is so interesting. Even if you're not going to stake yourself ever, even if you have no intention, it's going to change the supply and demand dynamics in a very positive way. So it still matters to you. XRP will become more scarce. So if the XRP Ledger could support yield without compromising speed and efficiency, which is what I keep harping on in this video, it would also make XRP more competitive. Think about it. It would make it more competitive with assets like Ethereum and Solana. Because even without, hopefully with smart contract functionality, but even setting that concept aside, if there's a smart way to make this work, XRP would be more competitive with Ethereum and Solana purely because staking attracts people. It attracts institutions. It's a big deal, actually, if we can find a way to make this frickin' work. However, of course, Ripple's engineers also very openly warning about the dangers because they're being very responsible about this. They're not coming at this with some haphazard slapstick approach or something like that, which you wouldn't expect from them anyway. I'm just saying, though. The XRP Ledger's strength, it comes from the fact that there is no financial incentive attached to running a validator or participating in consensus. That's the strength, folks. So that absence of monetary motivation actually keeps the network decentralized because it removes the temptation for operators to optimize purely for profit. If you're there, it's because you really want to be there because it's good for you for reasons that are not directly tied to your wallet. Introducing reward changes human behavior. That introduces risk. That's the thing. So if rewards are added carelessly, fees could rise. And if fees rise, the XRP Ledger's greatest advantage, near zero cost and instant settlement, begins to erode. I'd not be cool with that. I would be pitching a fit about that. I would be bitching up a storm all up on the YouTubes and on X. I would not be okay with that. And again, they're not pushing for that. I'm just saying, I hope we're all on the same page in regard to that. We can't ruin what makes the XRP Ledger special. That'd be the stupidest frickin' thing we could possibly do. We would all be idiot sticks. Hashtag idiot sticks, XRP Army. That's what it would be. So let's not do that. Let's do the smart things. But if incentives are added to validators, I'm telling you, people will attempt to game the UNL or influence governance. I'm telling you. And that introduces centralization pressure, which is the very thing that the XRP Ledger was designed to avoid. It would just be like an upside-down Bizarro world doing something like that. And then there's also the risk that staking introduces governance problems or unintended technical complexity that contradicts the XRP Ledger's intentionally simple and deterministic design. Like, we don't want any of those things, obviously. So, ultimately, look, staking on XRP would only be beneficial if it were designed in a way that preserves everything the XRP Ledger already does exceptionally well. And in my mind, I do mean everything. If it keeps transactions extremely fast and extremely cheap, maintain that reliability, and if it doesn't alter the nature of consensus, which has been here since XRP's inception back in 2012, if it doesn't impact that or create unhealthy incentives, then it could be a major factor for adoption. I acknowledge that, absolutely. especially, again, among institutions that want both utility and yield. But if staking, if it were to introduce friction, all these things I keep saying, centralization, economic gamesmanship, I just got to reiterate, I'm concerned that would absolutely undermine what makes the XRP Ledger one of the most stable and resilient networks in the entire industry. We already have a winner here. Let's not muck it up. We've already won. XRP is an early winner of the crypto space. Let's not lose that, because even as it stands right now, already won, folks. So, look, this entire conversation, it's happening because the XRP Ledger, undeniably entering a new era. Things are changing. Crypto's accepted in the United States now. The war on crypto is over. XRP has legal clarity. Institutional adoption is happening in a way that we were just dreaming of even just a couple years ago. It's actually here now. So, imagine just with the possibility of programmability, which I think could be coming, and obviously tokenization, which is here, the ETFs, institutional interest, all that's here. And it's all finally converging. I'm just saying the community has an opportunity to think about what is possible without losing sight of what remains, of what must remain unchanged. I think it's a tremendous opportunity at a minimum here, and I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how this, thoughtful community conversation unfolds. So you guys tell me what you think, but I think there probably is a smart way to do this. And I'm not alarmed by the conversations that I've seen thus far. I just want to make very clear, we as a community, in my opinion, we absolutely must make sure we don't lose sight of what's important, which is keeping the XRP Ledger good at what it does now. And if that means we can't have staking, then screw it, let's not have staking. But if you can have staking in a thoughtful way that doesn't screw that up, yeah, let's do it. Hell yeah. Anyway, you guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. I am not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo.